The fleet of the Cardassian Union, often maligned by the victorious Allies at the end of the Dominion War, rose rapidly during the 24th century from a small, technologically backwards systems defense force to become one of the largest and most capable fleets in the region. Though the Union was never able to quite reach the status of a first-tier power, its performance during the Dominion War, where the Union found itself besieged on all sides, puts to shame the oft-repeated trope of the Union's inferiority compared to the Federation and Klingon war fleets. In its organization, the Cardassian Union's Starfleet differed significantly from the norm across the galaxy. Rather than dividing its forces into fleets, task forces, battle groups, squadrons, and flotillas, the Union instead divided its naval forces into orders. These orders were tasked with specific types of operations in specific operating environments. A high degree of specialization could be seen, with the ships themselves assigned for the border orders being optimized for patrol and defense of the Union's outermost colonies, while battle orders located in the interior possessed large numbers of powerful warships meant for combat in large, massed fleet battles. This split between border and battle orders, the basic unit of the fleet, seems simple. But the reality, as always, is more complicated, with several highly specialized orders also existing within this framework, to say nothing of the likes of the Obsidian Order and their highly secretive and significant naval forces. All of which goes a long way to muddy the theoretically simple Cardassian fleet organization scheme, as often happens with naval classification. Cardassian ships are classically designed not for single-ship actions, but operating in pairs or trios against more significant enemy forces, providing commanders with a broader range of options to engage enemies and cover larger areas on a more effective basis. This would, however, begin to change by the time of the Dominion War, as larger numbers of bigger cruisers were becoming available to the Union's different orders. The Cardassian Union classifies its ships in a manner broadly similar to the standard practices of the other powers in its neighborhood, with the ubiquitous terms of battleship, cruiser, frigate, and escort all in common use. Battleships represent the largest and most powerful units in the various orders. Due to their expense, though, the Union seldom operated large numbers of the type, preferring small, more multi-mission ships. Arguably, the most well-known battleship operated by Cardassia would be the ships of the Keldon class, which came in several variants. Cruisers follow on as the next step down in size and power after the battleships. Traditionally, the Cardassian Union operated relatively few cruisers, using them mostly as squadron flagships and as scouts for the battle orders' battleships. However, this policy would begin to change as the long border war with the Federation dragged on, and the Union gained increasing experience dealing with the heavier ships operated in numbers by Starfleet. And with the introduction of the Galor class of medium cruisers, the Union began to rapidly standardize on the cruiser type. This standardization around larger, heavier ships came at the cost of the frigate, the Union's historical standard of warship class. Frigates in the service of the Union tended to be somewhat larger and heavier than their counterparts in foreign fleets, allowing them to take on larger cruisers in the kill groups they often worked in as a means of overcoming their individual limitations. Many classes of frigates were operated by the Union, though most classes were phased out as the border wars dragged on in favor of increased Galor production, with frigates being a rare sight by the time of the Dominion War. And finally, below the frigate we have the most numerous type of ship in Cardassian service, the escort. These were typically small ships, even by foreign standards, seldom able to stand up to ships of equivalent role from other navies. But the pack tactics employed by Cardassian ships would go a long way to alleviate this one-on-one disparity, Throughout the 24th century, the durable and highly adaptable Hideki platform served as the corvette of choice for the Union. In common with most of its peers, the Cardassian fleet was designed around providing the Union with security and law enforcement in peacetime, with sufficient forces for border patrol as well. In wartime, it would then provide fleets, battle groups, and task forces to engage enemy forces and either defend friendly worlds or else seize enemy territory in sweeping offensives. Due to the severe resource scarcity of the Union's territory, the Navy also took on further roles, being tasked with the transport of raw materials and personnel across the territory of the Union. As a result, many of its ships served multiple purposes in the name of efficiency and multi-role adaptability. With the formation of the Union, the Cardassian fleet was a mixture of small, old, and primitive craft. These ships were basic even compared to the ships operated by the minor powers in their neighborhood, to say nothing of the mainline cruisers in service with the Klingon or the Federation fleets. Obviously, the new order placed modernization and growth of the Navy as a high priority, quickly building up an impressive naval force with new classes introduced at a rapid pace which completely outclassed their predecessors, which in many cases may have been introduced just a few years before themselves. As the Union increasingly came into conflict with its neighbors over comparatively resource-rich areas on their respective frontiers, this ever-increasingly advanced navy was put to the test against peer-level opponents. In a string of mixed-bag conflicts, the Union would rapidly expand and grow, with several worlds and nations annexed outright, though major losses were sustained in many engagements, with lessons learned going into the next generation of warships employed by the Union. With these improved vessels in hand and a thorough intelligence file in the order, the Union then felt confident enough to oppose the United Federation of Planets, engaging in a prolonged and drawn-out hot peace which regularly broke out into full-blown campaigns with multiple task forces committed by both sides. While the Union had expected conflict with the UFP to be brief and to the point, anticipating only light resistance by Starfleet once they were confronted with the full might of several orders' worth of warships, it being expected that the Federation lacked the stomach to engage in actual conflict. The border wars quickly dragged into a conflict spanning multiple decades which consumed vast amounts of Cardassian resources and manpower for very little gain. The conflict being dragged out far longer than was considered prudent by the Union, this being because the leadership grew increasingly desperate to manage some, even minor win against the Federation to convince themselves it was not all in vain and sell the war to the public. By the time Cardassia finally accepted the Federation's offer for a peace treaty, the firm border agreement establishing the constantly troublesome demilitarized zone between the two powers, the Union was in a serious economic and societal trouble, with the war ravaging the fragile economy of the Union. Furthermore, several systems formerly occupied by the Union, most notably Bajor, were evacuated, both due to the peace treaty stipulating it and also by the efforts of local resistance groups, which managed to force out their Cardassian occupiers late in the conflict, as the Union was occupied elsewhere. This created an environment of intense tension and hardship for the citizens of the Union, as well as significant hostility towards the Federation. This hostility and poor economic state would be used to great effect by the Dominion, which quickly brought the Union under their control, ultimately sending Cardassia into the nearly total destruction that it would experience as the battleground between the Dominion and the allied powers of the Alpha and Beta quadrants. Ending the conflict largely leveled and brought to the brink of the Stone Age, the future of the Cardassian Union is still uncertain. Expanding rapidly and growing ever more capable, the fleet of the Cardassian Union would end its existence basically at the level it had started at some 60 or 70 years before, with their performance during the war often unfairly lambasted in the Federation or Klingon empires. But the reality is that the Cardassian fleet fought against vastly superior forces in a prolonged conflict to which it was not designed, and remained capable until the bitter end.